Well, good afternoon and welcome to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. Bill Carell here, still and again, joined also by my dear friend Ken Caputo and my other dear friend Jan Jeremias. And every week we get together and we kind of have a little bit of, well, a little verbal volleyball and other fun sports to kind of dive into what is this thing called empowering human beings all about, and what does that bring to people if they can choose to be empowered as opposed to being stressed or in some other state that they're not really all that happy about, shall we say. So the goal here is to just plain talk about things in such a way that we're sharing our lives with you. We're sharing things that we've read. We're actually sometimes making things up as we go along, which is all part of that creative process of exploration. So today, before I start passing it around, I'm in a kind of an interesting state. This has been an interesting, maybe last 3 or 4 weeks, but in the last 24 hours, yesterday was my wife's birthday. So we went out to dinner last night. And then kind of a sad announcement I heard when we were out to dinner. My sister called, and her husband of almost 30 years passed away. And so it actually is it's very sad, and at the same time, it's been going on for a while, and it was a blessing. So then we went to bed last night and got up this morning at 5:15 to go and see this eclipse for the blood red moon, and we did it. Got a picture of it, and then went back to bed. And then later on in the day, I got a phone call from my cousin and my 88-year-old aunt. His mother passed last night as well. So it's a day with kind of mixed feelings, and I'm not even gonna act like I have any idea what it means, but to me it just reinforces to me how sacred our moments of being awake and in our lives are, and being thankful for those things. I guess the two best things for me to always and everywhere feel is, number one, I'm just completely in awe of how much gratitude fills my heart. And along with that, it's constantly changing places with love. I just love everyone, and I don't mean that, in a way that means anything other than I already accept exactly who you are, for everything you are and everything you are not. And that's for everyone. Now I want to get to know you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for bringing powerful energy. And today, you know what I'd kind of like to talk about? Having said that and gotten it off my chest, I'd like to talk about friendship. I'd like to talk about friendship, and maybe what would be a good word for alliances or partnerships. We've talked partnership before, but let's just dive in on friendship and see where that takes us. Does that work?
Mhm.
Miss Jan, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm good. I love the topic of friendship.
Yeah.
I've always looked at my friends as my family because you can pick your friends, you can't pick your family. And so um, I've always considered my family, my friends, as family members. Um, I think sometimes when people meet me, I'm very quick to do that. They're almost taken aback how I want to say serious, like how important and how much value, I guess, is a way that I put it
Yeah.
on it, that it's just, I think people are sometimes a little bit like, whoa, but that's just, I think I just value people. And so people who come into my life that I feel connected to, or that even if I don't, but especially for those I feel connected to, it's, I think, very obvious usually.
It's an interesting concept. You know, the whole notion of family. I can remember at one point back in the 1980s, I had some really, really dear friends that we got together, and our friendship went up so quickly. And so at one point, in the middle of the evening, somebody said, "You want another beer, or you want some of this or some of that?" And and I said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "I know where everything is." And they go, "Yeah, when you're here, you're family." And I said, "Oh God, please, not that. Treat me better than that." It's kind of like one of those little jokes because as uh, when people are that close to you, they have the power, to wake things inside of you that are either really, really great, and then sometimes not so great. But I can also remember we're coming into the holiday periods now: Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, all that good stuff. And I had a guy in a class that I was taking back in the 1990s who said, "Yeah, here they are, the holidays. It's the opportunity to relive the trauma of your childhood with the original cast."
Well, as you're saying, it's something, a gift. I was with last week. I spent some time with a childhood friend, so, and her husband, who, she was one of the reasons I moved back to Connecticut, was to be closer to her. And I realized, one is the side they bring out in me. Like, it was just so interesting. I mean, her mother and my mother were friends before we were born.
Yeah.
So I've known her my entire life. And just this interesting kind of like teasing and, just pure humor and laughter that comes out, which I don't think I show that side to many people. So it was just kind of interesting. Afterwards, I actually thought about it a lot. And now that we're having this conversation, I think it's really interesting that there are people that you can just really, quote unquote, I don't have any hair left because mine's so short, but let your hair down with.
Yeah. Yeah, that I think that's a really good thing. Out of the blue, we're sitting here the other day, and all of a sudden my wife goes, "You know what?" She goes, "I'm not silly." She goes,
I'm not silly either. So tell
"Yeah."
your
She
wife.
says, she says, "I just noticed I'm not silly." I like never am silly for just silly sake, right? I think I'm silly enough for both of us, to be honest with you. But what a cool thing for her to come out with.
Hmm. Now I can understand that because at one point or another, people have asked me about teaching kids yoga, and I never did. And I said, I don't have that kind of silly gene in me. I said, yeah. So I could
What would
really,
that mean to you to teach yoga to children?
I think you have to have, I don't know, there's just obviously a way of communication. I'm sure Ken could speak to this better than I could speak to it. Um, as far as martial arts and kids, I don't think it's that different. But I have friends who were really, really gifted at it, and not that I taught it for a little while and with someone else, but it was just something that, that didn't speak to me so much, and I was much more focused on older adults. And so everybody has their kind of population that they like to be around or are really super comfortable with. And for me, it was
Mm,
elderly people.
it's interesting.
Yeah, if you're gonna teach kids, you definitely can't take yourself too seriously. They will humble you quickly. And
That's
yes, silliness is definitely can be a helpful attribute, although not necessary. You can actually be very, I don't know, kind of serious and structured and even demanding, and they'll respond. It's just how genuine are you in who you are and how that translates to your work with them, you know?
mm,
Also, is kind of, drifting away and coming back here, with my own thoughts. And I'm sure this is going to be this way for today. I'm distracted by things easily today, but it also seems to me, are you how easily can you hand the lead over to someone who's 11 or 12 years old? and follow for a minute or two just to like how that conversation goes.
Hmm.
So, funny thing. I- When we talk about children, it brings up a whole soup of different types of feelings and ideas. And Ken, being around kids of a certain age, do you find yourself kind of losing that distinction of the difference of your age to theirs, or is that always present?
Um, it's it's there. Actually, the interesting thing is where the distinction can get lost, at least in my experience, is more the fact that so I had the unique position of, I'd have them for decades. So, I mean, I still work with people who started working when they were 5 and now they're 30. So, so one of the things that would be interesting would be basically practicing the discipline of looking at them with fresh eyes. So you don't forget they're not 8 anymore, they're 12, or they're not 12 anymore, they're 17. There's so many developmental shifts happening, like relative to an adult in a rather condensed time span. So what I found was helpful was looking at where they were developmentally and in their path of their life clearly, and not filtering it through my own expectation of what they should be. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So yeah, and I think a lot of people, especially people that don't work with kids, they have judgments and assumptions of what it means to be a kid rather than looking at the human in front of them that's at a certain developmental like point in their life.
Yeah, it's remarkable to hear you describe the vicissitudes of and the nuance of all of those kinds of interactions, where most of us are blind to the filter that we're viewing the world from and through. It's just how it is. You know what I mean? But to be able to step back for a moment and kind of examine what's actually happening and appreciate it for something that may not be something you already know.
Well, when you're living in this kind of the duality of always practicing as a teacher and a student, your commitment becomes to the learning conversation. That's happening in both directions. There's potential for you to learn from them to learn from you. So so I found myself like feeding my perspectives and the things that I choose to do more of and do less of based on creating a result of positive, productive learning outcomes that expand over time. So it forces you to not think, and I've worked with teachers that they have information and they have expertise and they're leaving it on the student to figure out how to absorb that, and they have this expectation, I know it, your job is now to know it, and your job is to figure out how to know it. So, and to me, it felt more fun to be think, all right, they're not getting it. What does that mean? How can I make it? How can I creatively help them get it? And and sometimes they just won't, and that's fine too. You just come back. There's always another day until there isn't, but yeah. So I think it's what's your relationship to the child, or to the going back to friendship. What's your relationship to the friend? What does friend mean to you, and what is the result that you're committed to in the process of being friends with someone? It's clumsy, but I tried to circle it back to the original conversation, which was about friendship.
But one of the,
You may
and
actually have done it and not just tried.
yeah, and also it was done very eloquently, Ken. Uh, but one of the things I was struck by, um, with what Ken was saying is watching his students and time, having them very young and whatever is the progression. And there is a point, there are certain ages when I think when you're friends with someone where age matters. And then you get to a point where it doesn't matter anymore, where I have my closest friend is 20 years my senior. She was just 80, and she's one of my best friends. And then having friends that are of vast ages, and the age really becomes insignificant to me, in that relationship.
I share the same kind of relationship. Um, the guy that I was playing golf with is my dad's age on 9/11. Uh, when we were on the course and we got the news that all that nonsense was going on, but we got to be very, very good friends, and we had golf in common, and we had a lot of other things in common. And his wife was the first retiree from my company, Fran, and she worked with us for about 6 years, and then she retired, and we visited them over and over and over and over again for the next 15, 18 years. But yeah, 22 years older than me.
Yeah, and so it becomes insignificant. And I think what Ken's talking about in acceptance, people are just realizing the realization that when you look at someone, they're no longer 10, that they're 17 or whatever, is as I deal with elderly people, older adults, or actually also my parents, is looking at them in that way too, realizing is that whole realization
Sure.
of them not being, when you're dealing with elderly, is that they're not, maybe as able to do things as they were, and not to rush anybody along that path, but is that acknowledgement of seeing where people are.
Again, it's kind of a fascinating conversation from the standpoint that there you are.
There he is. Oh, yay.
I'm here.
I want to get you a T-shirt that says "I crawl in the mud."
This one, kind of
There you
close.
go. Yeah, but that's in code. I would actually put the words "I crawl in the mud."
Well, I actually do have somewhere. I have a special T-shirt that was made following a 50-mile mountain bike race at Ascutney, and it poured the whole time, like
Wow.
to the point where we had to like crawl up the mountain dragging our bikes behind us. So they actually sent us all Survivor T-shirts. Says I survived Mudfest 2000, whatever year it was.
That's fun.
So I do kind of have a mud shirt like that.
Friendship. Strikes me that it's possible doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. You know that the distinction of being a friend might be to have people around you that are useful in some way, versus someone that you have just a fundamental relationship with that almost nothing could change it. Or maybe it's somebody who is a friend of a friend, and by proxy already have a relationship formed there. But the whole notion of being like the single older person inside of a group of 17-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 8-year-olds, I've always thought that was kind of fascinating. You know what, my experience, far different than either of your two, but I used to play guitar at our Episcopal church services. And so one of the main reasons I got started playing guitar was because the woman who was in charge of the children's program invited me to come down and sing songs with the kids, and we just plain had a ball. So it got to be something that we did most Sundays. I'd start out downstairs playing guitar with the kids, and then we would come upstairs about roughly halfway through the service. And there were kids that started taking up guitar because they enjoyed what I was doing, and I let them try to play my guitar with their small hands, and then got them hooked up with a half size guitar that with flexible nylon strings on them. And of course, it didn't sound quite like my guitar, but it didn't really matter all that much. But even in those instances, the kinds of questions and where they came from, and I looked forward to seeing these kids and grew special attachments to three or four of them. And now these kids are all in their 40s. Those were kids that back in the 1980s when they were just 8, 7, 10, 12, whatever they were. And now we're Facebook friends. And it's remarkable to see the things that they're up to, the questions that they have, how they face trials and tribulations in their lives. And I wonder, I notice now talking about it, I do regard them still as friends, and many of whom I haven't seen in probably 15 or 16 years.
Kind of an interesting thing. So if you think about it, the nuances of what friendship means, I guess, is going to be based on how committed you are to there being like a specific framework. So, I mean, I'm just thinking about I have friends that uh, they're all friends in very different ways, but they all transcend something. So whether it be age or values or distance or time or whatever, So, so maybe someone that you have a friend with that you only see at a Spartan race and, and we connect there, but there's not much interaction other than that or a more business oriented relationship or, but spoken to people that have difficulty with cultivating healthy relationships because they have a very strict paradigm for what things like that mean, like friendship means. So there's an expectation that kind of limits how many people can match that, and they can be okay with it. You don't need to have lots of friends, you know. So, but it's just kind of interesting how I think that that's you're right. The way you define it and how tight or loose that definition is going to influence how it expresses itself, I guess, in your life.
Mhm.
And along those lines, sometimes there's unchangeable, solid requirements for qualifying as a friend. Like for instance, I know people that will not be friends with somebody who they believe does not think the same things that they do. If there's not agreement on some fundamental principles, like as you were talking, where naturally it evolves, that there's some commonality that becomes very strong, and it's not the same with any two people. I feel that the same way in my life. There are people who just won't spend any time with somebody that they're not certain doesn't already agree with them on everything, because that would be in the group of not friends. And the whole notion of unfriending somebody, I have no idea what that's about. But this is something I think, that came out of our culture where people could be ostracized, or as the Amish say, shunned is a terrible thing. Just kind of wonder, the whole notion of, can you be a friend and then lose that status? I mean, can you do it without some kind of an activity or an action or behavior that makes you not a friend anymore?
I would answer that with a yes. I think that, there's most of us, especially over time, we have kind of I don't know, an immutable core of values and, things that we choose to honor in our life, and we're all evolving and changing. So I have certainly had people in my life that, the choice has been not to maintain a friendship um, because we just moved in different directions and, and it just didn't make sense anymore. Why Why try to force something that no longer fits with who they are or who you are or the circumstances you're now in? I don't know. I always think about the impermanence of every relationship. One way or another, something's going to cause it to end. If nothing else, it will be passing on, you know? So, so yeah, so they're ever changing. So, you know, I've seen a lot of people cause a lot of stress for themselves trying to hold on to something that maybe, was wonderful in its time and has reached a point where now it's no longer serving anyone in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I was right. I do think so because over the last few years, certain things have happened where I've actually, I have people who, I've lost touch with or I've not connected with for whatever reason over the last, because of some views, for example. And it wasn't something that, it was a, like Ken said, it was a core value. And I wasn't willing to alter my feelings and stance about it. Just wasn't going to happen. And I mean, it's not that you're not nice to them or you're not, like, if they called me, I'd gladly say hello. Just the relationship has changed and on,
Yeah.
moved on now. So it's not like there's any animosity or anger or I want to say dislike or hatefulness if you want to use such a strong word. There's just a progression.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jan. I've had similar experiences. I find right now, at this point in my life, I'm happier because of relationships that I've let go of and stopped fighting so hard to hold on to the detriment of everyone involved. It's kind of funny. It's kind of like when you sometimes you have to let go an employee, as a business owner, and everyone's relieved. Yeah. So and I found myself fighting way too hard to keep someone when they're miserable, they're making me miserable, and really but you don't want to end it, so you keep trying to force things to continue to fit when maybe they just don't. And it's not that anyone did anything necessarily wrong. It's just like you said, things change. You know, you don't want to go back and wear the clothes you wore in high school anymore.
Most I had a friend who used to say, I wore it once, I'm not wearing it a second time.
Yeah.
It wasn't that at one point, it wasn't meant to be returned as far as she was concerned. And so I think there are, you know, I think there are
And you think of
relations.
all the fond memories you have of when it fit, when it
Right.
was you. You always have that. You don't have to give that up just because the dynamic has changed. That's still you get those memories that served its purpose at that time in your life and theirs. It's just that things aren't static like that. Or if they are, it's probably unhealthy, you know?
Well, since I started out with you don't get to pick your family, I'm reminded, I think that's part of the issue with family, is family remembers you like you were 10 sometimes, and you're not 10.
Mm.
So all of a sudden they look don't I mean, to me, my nickname on my block was Baby Jan. I was the youngest, and you know, I think in a lot of ways my family look at me like that, like I'm the youngest and I'm the baby.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes family it's very hard for people to, family members and stuff still look at you like you know, that you're still whatever how old you were. Not to say every family, but I think some families does happen.
Of course, my mom would always counter when somebody said that she was a crackpot. She said, "No, I chose every one of my children." But um, the utility of friendship. All right, I think at its core, the it's fully engaged. I mean, it's a for me, it's a mindful process that it's not just because I'm in proximity to somebody or in a conversation at this moment. I have, I mean, literally dozens, if not hundreds of people that I've spent high quality time with, very intense periods of time over the last 40 or 50 years. And in every single case, after hello, it's just a continuation of the same conversation with the same feelings. And I think it's pretty remarkable, to be honest with you. It's a really, really nice place to hang out with folks, if you will. And it also means that I have a lot of places where I can go spend the night anytime I want to, which is that's kind of fun to find out too. Last year, I mean, like the first time coming out of the COVID cave, my wife was working 6 or 7 days, doing her thing as a postal carrier. And I just realized there were some friends of mine down in Florida that I hadn't seen for 2 or 3 years that were getting older. So I hopped in my car and I drove to Annapolis on one day and spent the evening with a gal that I graduated from high school and hadn't seen her for 10 years since a class reunion. Spent the night at a motel, got in my car at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then drove right straight through to Lexington, Kentucky, going all through the ups and downs of the interstate through the mountains. Unbelievable. So the next 2 weeks was just like that, going and seeing and staying with a half a dozen different friends who insisted, well, I'm going to go get a Airbnb. No, you're not. And those are just the kind of things where I would never have impinged on them. I never would have asked. And they just said, no, you're not going anywhere. We got a room all made up for you. It's right over here. Come check it out. And those aren't the kinds of things that I would put on a list of criteria for friends. You know what I mean? It's not like who's going to make it impossible for you to drive by their home and then not come see them. It's kind of a cool thing. And then to find out that relatives are also friends. Pretty remarkable, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Either of you had a friendship that had a sense of like timelessness to it? Like one of my dearest friends, Bob, I mean, we've known each other for 30 years and super close, but he was called, he's in the Army Reserves, and he basically was called up for pretty much every major conflict that's happened since like 1995. So there would be times where we wouldn't say a word to each other for 9 months. He was overseas, he had very limited, availability to contact. So, and then he'd come back from deployment, and the second we got together, it was like no time had gone by whatsoever. We just picked up right where we left off. There's no concern for the gaps, and never has been in all the years. Doesn't matter. We could not talk for a year, and it would be like we had just spoken yesterday. It's just very interesting, relationship. I don't know if you guys have had that experience with anyone in your life.
Yeah,
My friend that I just moved near, we would go through periods of our lives where we had very little communication. We were in different places, going through different things, and had even grown apart, I think, for a short period of time, and then got right back together, and it's as if nothing happened. That we're right back to when we were, like 10 years old. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
It's bizarre in some ways, but yeah, very much so. Like very, like time stood still. And
Isn't that an interesting thing?
Not to say that we both haven't grown, but just I don't know. I think that there's just this love and acceptance part of it that seems to be able to put all the different changes that we've both gone through to the side.
Yeah, the really interesting about friendship at that level are the code words that automatically trigger both participants, back to a specific time and place without having to mention either of the two things. But it's kind of a similar thing with my I've got a cousin Ed, and when he called me today to let me know that his mom wasn't with us anymore, he was just so careful. And it was, I haven't had a conversation with him since a year ago. But through a lifetime, both of us are 68 years old. It's the same conversation with all of the same emotion, the same history, the same understanding of the events that we went through together, the Uncle Bud stories, it's all there, and all of a sudden it's like this whole book opening up with all of this rich tapestry of stuff that we know and have done together and why we feel the way we do about each other that never has to be talked about.
Hmm. And to that note, there's something about the history that you share with someone, and that's to me what you're referring to,
Yeah.
is that history of shared stuff, even though it may not be communicated. It's always, it's underneath. It's on a layer underneath.
Yeah, that was that old catchphrase, when two people were talking to each other about something that the third person could not grok, could not wrap their mind around, then one of them would just say, "I guess you had to be there." So how do you think, how enduring would you say the concept that we're distinguishing of friendship, how do you think that is surviving with the new generations coming along? Are they regarding relationship with each other in a similar fashion, maybe more intense, maybe something different altogether? I don't know.
So my thought on this, I don't know. This is completely anecdotal and experiential. Um, there's the newer generations, let's just say for now under 30, they have access to a much larger pool of potential relationships than at any time in human history. So, I mean, if you went to high school in the 80s or 90s, you pretty much your circle were the people in your town for the most part. Like there wasn't this expanded. So so it's interesting how they're able now to connect with people that really, really align if they've become clear on what matters to them. And what I'm seeing in the younger group is they're gaining that clarity. There's a lot of them are starting to think about what's important to them, what matters, and they can take the time to be kind of selective and far reaching in their search for people that they feel more closely aligned with, and there feels like there's less the need to make do with what you got. So on the surface, that can seem like either you're willing to just, like you don't have an attention span or you're willing to give up on things very quickly. But I think instead, it's kind of like, the best way to get to the right yeses is through a lot of no's. So they're more willing to say no quickly, kind of quit early, quit often, like we talked about with Seth Godin, the dip, and and allow the right relationships to kind of come to them. And I don't think this is like an intentional thing. I think it's a byproduct of the way information flows now and the environments that they've learned to swim in. um, but I could be totally wrong. I'm not, there's this is not like some peer-reviewed social study that
But it would be really amazing to go out and test it, and just see how do kids today, the 40-year-olds, how do they view friendship? What is it really for them? For me, until I got to be, I don't know, 14, 15 years old, we moved around so much. My friends became whoever I was spending the most amount of time with. And that was it. So there were kids, for some reason, we'd start playing baseball in the backyard or something like that. We do that every single day, or ride bikes together or something like that. And then that got to be playing sports in high school, and actually, through we didn't have middle school, but fourth, fifth, and sixth grade on, there were probably 25, 30 different people that one way or another, I was on a sports field with them, like maybe 10 out of 12 months. And those are the people that today, and now that I'm thinking about it, that when we get together and I say, hey, we're all going to meet down at a restaurant in Mystic, and we get 18 or 20 people to show up. It's cool to hear the stories being told in a completely different voice, and also noticing how sometimes it sounds like what I recall, and other times it bears no resemblance at all, and they've just got a whole different fact set of what happened, how it went down, who was involved in it. And I find myself sometimes sitting there going, be open to the fact that I actually had no idea what was happening while it was going on. And that's only possible because all the work we've been doing for 2.5 years.
Well, I guess the question is how awake are you in the, let's say, or present, basically,
Yeah.
in whatever's happening. And to your original question about, I really can't speak to youth that much at all. Ken obviously has a lot more experience, and I'm not. I guess I'm in, like, of my friends who are kids, that they're actually, I think, struggling in relationships a lot. Because I think as much as things are open, I think they're also, there's something that can be open and then, yeah, almost too open so that nothing happens, or they don't know how to navigate the field, so to speak.
Yep. I've seen exactly what you're talking about, because when I work with coachees, one of the things I have them do is to list out all their close friends. It's remarkable to me how short the lists are usually. One, two, or three people, and that's it. It's like, do you interact socially with anyone? Oh yeah, I do all the time, but they're not my friends.
Well, I think to what Ken then said, that's where it gets to be, or maybe you said you have different types of friends for specific things. I think it was Ken. Like, he has his, you have friends that are business friends, and you have friends that are more social friends, and you have friends through, if you're affiliated with any sort of religious organization or kind of spiritual organization, you have those friends, and sometimes they might be different, and you might call upon them for different reasons.
That's one of the reasons why I ask about friends, because I've noticed in going on 35 years, 40 years of working with people, longer than that, where I've had direct reports, that I was not only interested in their growing and having more capacity and more understanding and more, shall we say, more skill in terms of dealing with relationship, simply because that's how we got things done effectively, and how everybody got promoted and got more money. But the interesting part of it is that somewhere along the way, there was like this idea that this is who I am at work, and this is who I am when I'm, playing baseball, and this is who I am when I'm at church. And like, there's all these different personas. You're not spinning a hat, you're actually twisting your psyche into being something different for these people, as if you're an actor on a stage or in a play. And so there's this notion of integration, that I stumbled upon and got quite interested in, the whole idea of reducing the need for anything to ever change. Because if you think about being on as many different volunteer boards as I was back in the 1990s, to try to be a different person on 16 different boards, or however many it was, And usually, probably half of them were either the president of the organization or chairman or something of that nature. So I kind of got this whole notion of just show up and be effective and see what that looks like for a little while. That took away the need to have private conversations with half the board members. I just didn't have the time, to do all of the politicking and everything. And it led for I just got to be known as somebody who runs great meetings. For some reason, we always stay on task. Everybody gets treated equally and fairly, and all points of view get heard. And if somebody's reiterating what somebody else has already said, I just ask them, is there a new point you can make here? Or are you just in agreement with somebody else in such a way that didn't take any power away from them, right? But what I found was it was easier for me to sleep. I never worried about actions that might be taken in a set of circumstances with groups of people. And it made it really, really simple and easy for me to do whatever I needed to do because I was always the same guy wherever I show up. That was the intent. I'm sure there will be some people that would say that I was successful at it or not, but it's still kind of the thing, I want consistency, and my core fundamental principles of how to behave with other people. I want them always to be present.
Yes, but I love what you said. I think there to what you're speaking of is a comfortableness that you have to have with who you are to be able to basically stand up as you, no matter the circumstance.
That's pretty well said, actually. That's
And
very succinct.
and I think that that's what I think of because I think of at points in my life where I was not comfortable in certain circumstances with who I was,
Hmm.
or I was not able to be who I really was in certain circumstances. And so I put on a facade or a mask, so to speak, since we're just getting over Halloween. I put on a mask and pretended. And eventually you realize that that doesn't work. Not if you want to really live a life.
No, something's got to give.
Something's got to give. And so you basically say, okay, well, this is who I am.
It's interesting. There's it can be helpful, at least I found it helpful, and I'll give an example of this. If you can understand the value of roles that you assume based on the environment that you're in and the people you're with, and how that doesn't necessarily contradict your identity of who you are. So like during the pandemic, there was a lot of remote learning. So and I work with a lot of moms especially who were really struggling with helping their child learn sitting at home in the computer because they were mom. And so the kids weren't seeing this as the mom, they were seeing mom in the role of mom, and mom's like, well, right now I have to be the role of teacher, but I don't want to not be mom. So so what we did was we started designing learning cockpits where they would create in their home a space that was dedicated to the idea of this is like school, this is the place where you go to learn. And like one mom, she was great, she actually got a wizard's hat, and she put on a wizard's hat and said, when I put on this hat, I'm still your mom, but the role I'm in right now is your teacher. And my role here is to help you. So my behavior is going to be a little bit different because I've assumed a role, you know? So like when I put on the belt and I walk out on the dojo floor, my role changes. The role dictates how I express myself through, I'm still me, but I'm not the me that you're going to go out to dinner with. I'm a different me. And if I'm working with a group of high level black belts, that role is very different from 35-year-olds who are there for their first couple classes. Yeah. So very, very different. right? But that doesn't take, I'm not being untrue to myself on a
Mhm.
deeper level. I'm just clear that I adopt certain roles. Like I always had this with titles. Like in the martial arts, there's a lot of military type titles and stuff. I don't like any of that in my space, in my dojo. We go by first names. There's not a lot of sir and ma'am and all that stuff. But when I'm in someone else, I'm invited to a tournament or something like that, I play by those rules because I respect the fact that they have those rules. So I'm
Mhm.
not going to, so how I express myself and how I'm even viewed by others changes because I'm just being sensitive and respectful of the environment that I'm in, you know. And the interesting thing is when you find yourself pretending to be something that makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's when we have to look at, is this an environment we should be in? And, you know, if you're having to change so much, maybe I need to remove myself, you know, or at least be clear of why this does not fit. You know, this role is not reflecting in a harmonious way who I am, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I mean, but there still is a clarity and a comfortableness with who you are,
Yeah,
even when you
yeah.
even when you put on those roles. I mean, I think I don't know that much, but from what my friends um, that I've looked at and different parenting situations that I've, from the observer coming and looking on, is this idea that, they try to be friends with their kids and they forget to be parents sometimes. And sort of like, I think, depending on the situation, I think, that could be confusing as far as, as trying to get advice or trying to give advice and to guide. So it's just I guess being clear on who you are so you can make so no matter what role you play, where you're in at the moment, you don't lose who you are.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because that is having worked with lots of parents and they're like, am I being too much of a friend? Am I being too authoritarian? It's like, how is the child responding? You know, your goal is to number one, help them to survive to adulthood, and hopefully for to have given them tools that allow them to be a responsible adult who can, you know, stand on their own and be their own person. And just like each of us, what a child responds to is to be very different. So you'd have three kids, and one you need to be more of a friend to,
Hmm.
and the other one you need to be more of a disciplinarian to, and not it's not who you are, it's what they respond to, you
Hmm.
know? And that's unique. We actually in teaching we use this thing called the avatar grid. And you know, you start in the center in the role of guide, but then you flex in and out of everything from professor to coach to advisor. And one of the things is friend, because you have to look at the dynamic that's occurring in the learning environment between the information you're trying to share and the students who are seeking to receive that information, what role will connect to them? And you flex in and out of it based on the response you're getting. You know, and I think where we get caught up is we're thinking, I'm this way, they need to respect that or they need to respond to that, especially if you're like in a parent child or teacher student relationship where there's a sense of a power dynamic, you
Hmm.
know? So it's a fascinating thing because I've seen that. Some parents are best friends with their kids and it's amazing. Others, that doesn't work out so well.
Hmm.
So, you know, I think that's why there's no one parenting book. You know,
Oh,
there's so many things and it's ever changing because your kid could respond one way and then hits puberty and all of a sudden it just flips completely. They are just a totally different human, you know, as the hormones shift everything and as the brain continues to develop. And so
right.
it works until it doesn't. So you better be ready to test new things till you figure out what does work and resign yourself to maybe nothing will work because that happens too. It's hard, but it does.
Having that gear where you can actually say this isn't working and start over comes from like a mindset of who do I need to be now, not what role do I need to transition into and put attention into that, but what's called for in this moment. What is this moment wanting and asking for? And if you are, if no one's ever that sure all the time, Jan, about who they are, no one, okay?
Nope.
However, you have to trust the trajectory, the fundamental core principles, the things that you honor in life, and the reason why you're out doing whatever it is that you're doing. And then in that moment, you want to honor, what new thing that's never been said before by that person is being called for in this moment. What new creation, what invention, what response to this situation will give you an array of acceptable outcomes, as opposed to doing the thing that you always thought would get you the result. And the result is either yes, it happened, or no, it isn't. But it's always better to play for a handful of different outcomes that would be acceptable. And now we can work with them from wherever that is. But the whole notion of trying to decide what part of the closet you put the next piece of clothing on from is really, in my mind, it's a distraction from being mindful in the moment that you're in right now, which is to be in a situation where you don't have a thought about what comes next. And then you can, instead of taking an action, you can ask a new question, which sometimes just sounds like, I don't know where this is going. What do you want to do now? What would be the right next thing for us to do as far as you're concerned? And just kind of let the conversation come back from there. But the whole notion of friendship, it seems to me that you would have to have a very healthy adult concept of being friends with yourself. The whole notion of I'm okay with who I am right now. And if I fail at doing what I'm doing, I will take that as advice that there's a change called for, and not that I'm a failure and that it's never going to work. And that whole notion of giving yourself advice. I don't know if you've ever pulled somebody to the side and they're saying whatever they're saying, and you want them to say something different, but you don't want to tell them what to say. You say, so for a moment, why don't we step back away and you be a close friend that's going to give you some advice about your behavior and what you should do next. What advice would you give yourself? That can be very insightful. And more often than not, it's usually something very critical. It's usually something harsh. Almost never is it understanding and accepting. It's like usually stop being a jerk. Like, are you seriously? Are you being a jerk? Or are you just saying something that's not working? Who works on being a friend to themselves?
There's a really cool practice. I've done it a couple ways. The kind of Eastern approach is to use a mirror.
Yep.
But there's a more Western approach where you just take a picture of yourself and you look at it and you keep looking at it like for like 10 minutes. You don't look away from it. And it's amazing how slowly it sort of becomes a stranger. It's like a really fascinating thing. It's and just it's like you said, you start looking and seeing, and then there's a dialogue that occurs, and then the thing that was shared with me is the doorway that often is lost in translation is there's mindfulness, there's self-awareness and all of that, but the other side to that apparently a lot of the mindfulness came over from a lot of Eastern traditions, but what hasn't quite made it yet is compassion. And that compassion is something that you has to be reflected inwards towards yourself, not only out into the world around you. And I found that very, very interesting as a thought experiment. Looking at a picture of yourself, watching all the things that come and go, and then being able to practice genuine compassion for whatever you've discovered or has revealed itself to you. It's interesting.
I did a workshop with a woman, and it was a business workshop on how to take selfies for marketing purposes. But we had
Mm,
to take selfies and how critical you are of how you look and what you're whatever in this selfie. But one of the things that we used to do as a yoga practice, which wasn't looking at ourselves, was actually sitting across from someone else and actually not breaking eye contact for like a
mhm.
long period of time.
Yeah.
And you're not speaking. So it's truly looking someone in the eyes without looking away for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And what an interesting exercise, because really the fine lines of individuality tend to those go away of the individual, and it becomes much more of the commonalities between you.
Mm. You know, that's it. So that just made me think of this really cool dude. I do not remember his name. He's a Buddhist chef. He's a master chef, and you do these classes. And one of them is he would give you like a slice of orange and a potato chip, and you'd have to put them in your mouth and not swallow or chew. Just let them dissolve on your tongue.
Hmm.
And the slice of orange, you would just get the orangey taste, and eventually it would slowly kind of fade away or whatever. But the potato chip would break down and become absolutely disgusting because it would break into its component parts and you'd start tasting the chemicals. Because, what he's saying is these are designed to make you consume them quickly. You don't actually mindfully eat these things because if you did, you'd be grossed out. And it was just really, really interesting. So, so the reflection, whether it's yourself or someone else, it sounds like that. It's like you're giving it time for the components to kind of break down, and then you get to savor them and see. You hope, yeah, maybe that would be a good thing to know if it doesn't taste so good too. If it's
Right.
distasteful, maybe isn't that an interesting use of time and attention? You know.
It- that was one of the core pieces that we did, Jan. It was called a Be With. And we would sit in chairs with our hands comfortably on our knees and with our knees almost touching each other to where our faces were probably about a foot and a half apart. And the interesting part afterwards is that everyone always felt like they had so much clarity in terms of understanding the other person for the first time ever. And what it really was more was an inventory of all of the random thoughts that come into your head that you have no choice. And then the choices that you make that are empowering about this person. And, it's like I did it one time with a guy who was 20 years younger than me. He said, Bill, I never realized you had so much nose hair.
That's fun.
Yeah, it was kind of cute. But yeah, he was a smart ass and he was a very smart young man. But there was a woman, I probably did this sort of an exercise a half a dozen to a dozen times. And the intention of it was to be able to authentically be with the thoughts that you're having about a total stranger when you're in a situation of giving them support without having to know what they were thinking or without having to try to, how we always have to know and we come out with the next thing. You're thinking this, right? Or you're thinking that. Well, see, if you're thinking about what you think they're thinking, you're not really being with them and paying any attention.
Yeah, you're not listening. And
Yeah.
that was another thing that we had to do was that I'm very good at it, but is actually truly listening without saying a word. Like basically letting the person talk for a period of time
Yeah.
without saying anything. And you realize how challenging it is depending on your personality and how like how much self-control it takes not to say anything. How like you want to get it out. It was like so interesting. It was like, oh, I want to say this.
Yeah. Our conversational skills get developed, by the time we're 12 years old, where we learn that we're quiet until it's our turn to blurt something out that nobody else is interested in, while they're all thinking about the thing they're going to say when it's next their turn,
Mhm.
Hmm.
which is quite different than having a conversation or creating some communication or actually having a relationship and a connection. That's like why I really appreciate what we do, because when one or the other of you is speaking, I have these amazingly smart thoughts that I have that I've forgotten by the end of the time that you're done talking. Friendship. We spend an hour a week together, and I would say we're friends. And I won't even ask you to vote on it, because this isn't something that I'm looking for you to opt in on. That's the other thing too, is friendship doesn't have to be in both directions. Sometimes you can be a great friend to somebody who has no recognition of it whatsoever.
It's interesting to
Yeah.
me. It's interesting to me that we do have this idea in our heads, though, of what we think friends should do,
Yeah.
and or at least points I know I have. And then all of a sudden something happens, and you feel like, well, they really should have helped out, or they should have, you know, been there, and they're not for whatever. And finally getting to the point that for whatever reason, which maybe it's a maturity or just an awareness, is like maybe at that point in their life they were just not able to. And that to me, I know was a big, for me, it was huge. It was like kind of like maybe they weren't able to at that time, and then just kind of letting it go for whatever reason, because at some point or another the reverse might have happened. But the whole idea of that, not judging, just not having an idea or a preconceived notion on what you think something should be,
Yeah.
or a relationship
Yeah.
should be.
Letting go of the expectation. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's because that's a cause of suffering. You have an expectation when you take an action that there's going to be a result that may or may not occur. So it's your attachment to the expectation that leads to that feeling. So if you just be you and you let go of the expectation, and of course, pay attention, because there are some people who will abuse, your giving heart, and you need to notice that, and not, and make sure that you're clear in your boundaries that allow you to function healthily. But it doesn't cost you anything to let go of an expectation, you know, based on the action that you take.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, friendship, it's definitely something that's worth taking a look at. And the whole notion of being mindful is to appreciate and hear yourself and listen to yourself listen, When you're aware as a third party listener to your own thoughts, you can start to make some judgments about which ones are supporting you and which ones would probably be a good one to leave by the roadside, and which ones are the beginning of a really, really good joke. But all of that said, here we are, another podcast, lighting the candle, a world that works, creating friends, empowerment, love, whatever you need. At the drop of a hat, just change the conversation. Any final thoughts?
Yeah. Feeling pretty good. We covered a lot. It's a good
Yeah.
conversation as always.
So with that said, the world is looking for me. So I'm going to sign us off here and thank you all at home for participating in our podcast, and we will see you again really soon. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.